welcome to this solution stage session on artificial intelligence in humanitarian response. I like to say humanitarian intelligence. My name is Wendy Q. I'm the Senior Coordinator for the Interagency Standing Committee Secretariat at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, otherwise known as OCHA. Let me introduce our speakers. I have Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, who is the Director of the Coordination Division and representative of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, based here in Geneva, and Mr. Kevin White. He's Senior Director of Data Science at Microsoft's AI for Good lab based out of Redmond, Washington, right? Let me just say, the Interagency Standing Committee, which we call the IASC, is the highest level humanitarian coordination forum of the United Nations system. It brings together 19 member organizations, UN agencies, NGO consortia, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and the World Bank to make decisions about humanitarian policy, to set strategic priorities, and to mobilize resources, and to coordinate response for the most pressing humanitarian emergencies we have today. So with that, as you may know, today our humanitarians are underfunded, overstretched, and under attack. And so the humanitarian sector is really at a critical inflection point. Crisis, conflicts, and needs are increasing in complexity and urgency, while our financial resources have been drastically reduced. So humanitarians are turning to the immense power and promise of artificial intelligence. So let's hear more about it. Ramesh, could you start us off by describing what's happening currently in the global humanitarian landscape and how humanitarians are already using AI to respond to today's complex crises?
Thanks very much, Wendy, and it's a great pleasure to be here also with you, Kevin. At the end of last year, before we faced this crisis that Wendy spoke about, we estimated there were about 300 million people who were in need of humanitarian aid in conflict situations and disasters. Now, that's 300 million. Now, we are planning right now, because of the funding crisis, to only target 1/3 of that. So we've dropped the ask that we have from 44 billion to 29 billion. So that's where we are. We have this massive funding crisis that's hit all aspects of humanitarian assistance, which means that those left furthest behind in crises will often in the case of today, will be left behind because we can't reach them. So we need systems and we need tools that can help us be much more effective, cost efficient, in this crisis, so that we can address as many people as support as many people as possible. And for us, AI can no longer be a future concept. We can't dance around it. We have to make it operational today, and that's what we have done. So humanitarian actors are embedding AI across workflows to enhance their agility, because we have to act on the hoof, as it were, to respond to crises. We never know when they're happening. We need to be much more precise about our work, and we need to scale up rapidly because you have millions of people who suddenly are in a conflict situation. But we are behind the curve on this, and we need to catch up. And so we need that expert assistance. We need that expertise that will help us do that. And I think this discussion with Kevin is also very helpful for that. So across the humanitarian system, AI is being used to forecast displacement from disasters, map the disaster zones so we can better understand where people are most in need. Optimize supply chains, super important in today. That's where you can really have some cost-efficient measures. And to streamline our decision-making. We belong to organizations, multiple organizations, so you need to have much better coordination among them, much more effective coordination. How do we streamline all those decision-making processes? And that's where AI can really help us. In areas that we don't know where AI can be better supportive, we need to have that sort of expertise to transform in how we respond to crises. So I don't think.
Thanks, Ramesh. Let me now turn to Kevin and ask: how do you see companies like Microsoft contributing to humanitarian action, and what responsibility would leaders in artificial intelligence have to shape a future in where the benefits of AI reach the most vulnerable populations?
Well, thanks, Wendy, for chairing the session, and Ramesh, it's great to hear your perspective, and I'm very honored to be on stage with you. When I think about humanitarian aid, humanitarian action, and the intersection with AI, I go back to a conversation that maybe some of you have heard me say before today or at previous events, that many of us have the illusion that we know where people are. You can open up Bing or Google or Bing and look on the maps. You can probably see your house. You might see your car. And if you come back a couple months later, you might see an updated version of it. But that's not the case in a lot of the world. It's definitely not the case in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. You'd be lucky if there's a commercial satellite that flies and updates that area maybe once every couple of years. And in some places, it's not. I've got a visual of Zinder in Niger where you look at the population growth over the last 10 years, and you can just see the images, because we work with a satellite company, and the last census they did was in 2007. And so when we talk about AI and humanitarian aid, the first thing that we need to work on together as a community is, can we know where people are so when there's an emergency they can be reached? And today we announced in a previous session an early access program for precision populations at scale that we're going to be working with partners in the nonprofit and the humanitarian aid sector so that we can really see over time how communities are growing. And that's a collaboration with Planet Labs, satellite imagery. We run AI models on the satellite imagery to see where settlements are and where they're growing. And then we work with the University of Washington, who's using AI also to map people in those locations. So that's one big investment we have. But then there are other ways that AI can help. And this is where I think the leadership comes in, and it's making sure that we're solving and actually working on problems that really affect, parts of the global south, especially in the risk area. We've released a flood exposure model, open source and data, so we can see over the last 10 years historically where floods have been. And it's not going to predict the future, but if you know where floods have been and you see a community growing in that area, that's an area that we need to be paying attention to. And we've got many more scenarios like that, but I think there's a great opportunity for not just tech to lead, but for collaboration. Because none of those problems can be solved by people like me alone. I'm a computer scientist, I'm an AI guy. It only works when I and Ramesh are working together, when our teams are working together, and we're joining forces to understand what's the reality of the situation and what's going to be useful. So there is a lot that AI can do, but it needs to be done in collaboration.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Which reminds me, leading up to this summit, we had a series of webinars of AI and humanitarian action, touching upon, among other things, ethics and governance. So I was wondering if, Ramesh, you could share some of the key takeaways from that series, as well as giving us your perception of what should be the call to action for the participants here today.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So earlier this year, we had convened a four-part webinar co-hosted by the IASC and also led by Wendy and her secretariat, and ITU's AI for Good platform. This is just to explore AI, the evolving field, and the role of AI in humanitarian action. And we are enormously grateful for those who collaborated with us. So in that respect, we had worked on predictive analytics that we look for. We'd look at how do we use data signals to map potential crisis areas, to map populations on the move, etc. So we learned a lot from what we've been doing so far, but we need to coordinate it better because we were working in silos. So I think in response to your question, saying that what these sessions did was they brought together 2,000 participants from across the UN, the non-governmental organization field, governments, academia, and the private sector, most importantly. And that partnership with the private sector is going to be increasingly important. So what are some of the takeaways from that? I think one thing that, and I think Kevin alluded to it, is that ethics must lead this, because we are talking about people who are furthest left behind in crisis. There's no one else to support them. Often the humanitarians are the only ones left there to support them. And they are also under attack. They are a protected population because they've been targeted by armed groups, or they've been affected directly by floods, earthquakes, etc. So ethics must come first, and data protection is going to be super important to that. So to ensure that those guardrails are firmly in place and there's a good understanding of that. And then also to understand, the other thing that we got out of the event and the sessions was that we are already using AI for delivering impact, but we don't know what everyone else is doing, what we are doing inside the house. So how do we better have tools that can provide that coordination amongst us? The third thing that came out was that obviously, as in many of the work that we're doing, many of the functions that we're doing, we cannot do this alone. We need partners, and that partnership is super important because we have fewer and fewer resources, and the task at hand is getting bigger and bigger. So the gap between the needs and the resources is growing. So we need to have partnership when we do that. And if you're going to work on partnership, we want to scale up delivery. And if you need to have scaled up delivery, we need systems. And AI will offer us that will turn the key, basically, on making systems more effective. So the call to action, there are 5 calls to action in this for us, for you as well. One is, how do we build together, and how do we align on these shared frameworks and governance models? 2, how do we start? What is the problem? How do we start the problem? We should let humanitarian needs and not tech trends drive innovation. So we need to identify what those needs are and have a common understanding of that. 3, we have to invest in people, equip all staff with basic AI literacy and support local capacity. It's amazing what the most disadvantaged populations can do if you give them the tools. Those populations in Darfur, in camps in Somalia. Those kids, the youth there, are incredibly resilient and also innovative. 4, we need to share what works, common best practices, make sure that there's a rotation of learning that goes around between us. We need to think big, but we need to start small, because we need to make sure these things work. And if they don't work at the smallest level, the confidence will evaporate. So we need to think big, but start small, and then therefore edify that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ramesh. Kevin, you heard at the outset that we're in a current crisis in the humanitarian sector. So I was wondering if you could tell us your views on how artificial intelligence can be used to increase efficiency, which is kind of what we're being pressed to do, without exacerbating inequality and poverty. And then maybe if you also want to share some of your calls to action for the 2 communities to work closer together.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get a couple thoughts. I think the first thing that we need to continue to focus on as a tech community is continuing to make sure that all of these language models actually work in as many languages as possible. Okay? What these language models use as data to train has been a lot of data that's been on the web. English is the predominant language that people publish the web in. And so one of the key kind of initiatives that some of us are starting to take, we're looking at this in the AI for Good Lab, is how do we start tuning or adapting some of these models so that they work with languages that may not be as represented on the web. I mean, just even for an example, of course, there's different dialects in the global south, but even, here in Switzerland, France, I mean, in the Alsatian region, I mean, there's a different dialect there, which is a combination of French and German. And will these, if you're speaking in that language to the model, will it return the results that make sense and make it compelling to use the model? So that's an area that I really want to see all of us continue to invest in, because that's at least the beginning of equity for a lot of people. I start thinking about when you mentioned efficiency, there's so many services that are underrepresented that I think AI can help a lot in. So, for example, in the global south, in the legal service, there's generally 1 lawyer to every 1 million people. In the US, it's about 1 for every 250. We don't want AI or a chatbot to replace a lawyer, but there is such an underserved amount of potential legal backlog just to get basic services, to understand your rights, that there is a role that it can play. I think about education. And I think about a project that we're working on with one of the universities in my home state of Washington State in the United States, where can we use AI chatbots as students are learning and provide more real-time assessments, both for the teachers and the students. And this can be done at any skill level. This can be done in secondary school. This can be done in higher education. This can be done in labor training. As you're learning, ask questions, respond, tell it what you understood, what you may want to go back and study. Don't answer for you, but help you understand the subject material. So I think there's a huge area there. I also think of places like healthcare, and where AI has been playing a role, retinopathy of prematurity. It's a disease that premature babies have. And what happens is within the first 24 hours of the life of a preemie, they may develop a disease which will have them go blind. It's the largest preventable blindness disease in the world. It predominantly is impacting the global south right now because there's not enough pediatric ophthalmologists who can diagnose and send people for care. But with AI, and this isn't the new cool ChatGPT AI, you can use a mobile phone, you can take a picture of that baby's eyes, you can send it to a model and it can say, hey, there's a likelihood here, you need to go see a specialist ASAP, and community practitioners can use that. And so those are all sorts of areas, in addition to the ones that we, I think, talk about in the day-to-day office work. Can we use it for translation? Can we use it to help us be creative? Which are all important. But the more I research, the more I learn, the more I get to travel the world, there are so many areas where I think it expands the pie, at least at this current moment. And I'm looking forward to those scenarios. And just, I guess lastly, I do think there's a lot in skills and training that needs to happen. I think we are doing our part with courses online, with LinkedIn, to make sure people have access to training. But fundamentally, you still need to be connected to take that training. And I was in a talk earlier today where I think the latest number from ITU is 2.6 billion people still are not able to use the internet. They might be in an area where there is internet, but they can't afford it. And that's a problem that we need to solve. We've been measuring the AI uptick in different parts of the world, and you have a funnel of, are you connected to electricity? Because if you're not, we're not going anywhere, so we need to make sure we solve that problem. Do you then have internet connectivity? If you don't, you need to solve that problem. Do you have the digital skills? And then you need to use AI. So we talk a lot about AI, but we still need to make sure we're focused on that, ensuring that those who want to use AI actually have the building blocks. That's an area we're invested in. I think that's an area that I think all of the tech companies are looking at and we should continue to look at. So, and for my call to action, I get to be privileged and lucky enough to work with a lot of people here at the UN, a lot of humanitarian organizations. And I just think we need to continue to focus on a shared mission, shared objectives, especially when it comes to risk. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which organization we work for because we're all humanitarians. And my call to action for all of us is to continue to collaborate, continue to be open, to continue to operate with the best intent. If you see duplication, be humble and work together, and someone pick a new problem to work on, because there's just so much untapped demand. So.
Thanks so much to both of you for your valuable insights. I think we often say, even in our sector, that if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And sometimes we need to start with understanding, is it a nail, or is it a screw that we're dealing with, and get the right tool to adopt. And I thought also the book that represents some of the work of AI for Good Lab, Microsoft's, is very interesting. Those of you in the development community, there was a podcast recently by DevEx that reviewed it that speaks to some of those examples and use cases. I think it's a good way to fire off some ideas and how we can also collaborate more in partnership going forward. And so this conversation is really part of a broader journey where we use AI to bring innovation to solve some of our most pressing challenges facing humanity, but at the same time we're reinforcing humanitarian principles, right? Inclusivity, ethical use and sustainable use of some of these tools during humanitarian response. We really do need, as you said, Kevin, more strategic trust-based partnerships. And Ramesh, you emphasized the partnerships between private sector and also intergovernmental organizations to help shape the future of AI and humanitarian action. And as in the mission of this whole summit, the mission of AI for Good, we're really trying to use AI to reach the most vulnerable people, to bring effective and efficient humanitarian action to those most in need. So thanks to all of you for joining us here today, and please spread the word of our call to action from our great speakers, Kevin and Ramesh. And thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Wendy.